Linda, and I'm really delighted today to introduce to you Reah Hague. Reah and I met through the marvels of modern technology. We're all on so many different social media things. We met through Brains magazine. And I was intrigued when I first talked to her, and I said, "Hey, I think you should be a guest on my podcast," and she agreed. So I'd like to turn it over and first of all ask you what interested you in being a guest on this show.
Yeah, we had a conversation for my podcast, I believe it was, and the fact that we were able to have a conversation about religion and spirituality with such objective views, it really was that objectivity that drew me into being a guest on your podcast, and just such a great conversation that we had on mine. But it was really your openness and your ability to be objective in conversations that can quite often cause friction.
So I know we talked when we talked. You had some different relationships with religion. So can you tell us a little bit about how your religion and your thoughts on all those spiritual matters have changed over the years?
Yeah. So, I've gone through this kind of ebbs and flows when it comes to religion and spirituality. And I've gone through not practicing any kind of religion to being a very strict Christian to kind of really working to find myself in the midst of everything. I've always been kind of interested in other religions, but the only original religion I ever even heard of really in depth was Christianity because that's what I was raised around. Um, so uh, I pursued education in Christian studies. At the time where I entered college, I was studying for my bachelor's degree in Christian studies, and I was a very, very strict practicing Christian. I was very strict on, uh, I guess, practices, rituals, and things like that. Prayer. I stopped watching certain shows on TV. I didn't curse. I tried to be kind of the model Christian, outward. And so I went to college and I was earning my bachelor's degree in Christian studies. And it wasn't until I really, really studied the religion and learned about it that I had this aha moment like, oh, practicing this religion is not about being perfect on the outside. And a lot of times religion can kind of give us that facade that having a relationship with God is really about how we present ourselves. And the practices that we keep and so now I don't consider myself a Christian, a modern Christian. I go to church not every single Sunday, but on a pretty regular basis. I have certain traditions we do in our house. I'll pray before the kids go to school. Before there's a big event, before travel. Certain things, but not ritualistically to where okay, we have to do this anytime we do this, or I just kind of I listen to my heart and I listen to God, and if I feel led to pray over something, then I'll do that. But I don't consider myself a Christian currently, not in the eyes of modern day Christianity, anyway.
So do you consider yourself any religion right now
I don't.
or more
Um,
spiritual?
yes, I have connected with someone who practices Buddhism, and I'm eager to have them on my podcast and learn more about Buddhism as a religion. But I don't currently practice any. I guess if you had to categorize it, I practice closer to Christianity than other religions. But that's partially because I haven't thoroughly learned other religions, to explore other practices and things like that. But so if I guess more closely just because that's what I'm familiar with, but
I can understand that. I have several friends who consider themselves, I'm not sure if they call themselves Buddhist Catholics or Catholic Buddhists, but but I
I've
think
heard
a lot
that.
of people have more than one religion that they really call on. But what do you think has been the most impactful part of your spiritual journey? Like what really prompted you to maybe get away from the ritualistic practices?
I think it was when I was in college and actually really diving in and studying thoroughly Christianity. My husband and I would have certain conversations, and at the time, he was an atheist. And it was between learning and the actual religion, because you can practice a religion just because that's what you're used to being around, but not actually learn about it. And I think that's what a lot of people do, just kind of are phased into a religion by family or whatnot. And my husband has gone through a journey himself to, when he was younger, he was a strict Christian, and he became an atheist, and we kind of switched roles a little bit. um, and I think that was really the most impactful moment, actually learning about it, um, and having conversations with him. This was kind of the point in my life where I went from strict Christian to I'd rather focus on spirituality. He made a lot of good points from his own walk through atheism. And then I made good points through my walk, and we shared those with each other, and then we kind of gradually switched sides a little bit. I don't consider myself an atheist, and he doesn't consider himself a Christian, but we are kind of on opposite sides than we used to be, strict this and strict that. We've kind of meshed together to have a more common understanding. But that was probably the point of my life where I actually learned, and I stopped trying to force myself to be what I thought God wanted me to be, and started doing what he really wants me to do, which is have a relationship with him and have a healthy relationship with him.
That's really quite interesting. This morning I had a Lyft driver that was practiced a Sikh religion, and he was kind of explaining to me a little bit of the differences between Hinduism and Sikhism, or I guess it's called Sikhism. I don't know, but it was interesting conversation. I always love talking to my Lyft drivers because I seem to learn a lot from them. And I think you're
That's true.
so right about studying, whatever religion you belong to. I think it's important to just not take things that were handed down to you, perhaps from
Right.
parents or relatives, and maybe they're not really the right thing. So I think learning about any religion is always healthy. And the more you learn about different religions, I think the more tolerant you become. That's what I've experienced anyway.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
How would you describe the difference between religion and spirituality? Because it seems like you're leaning more to the spiritual side. Um, so how would
Yeah.
you explain the difference?
I think spirituality is about a relationship with God. And whether that God be a deity or God be a spiritual connection, there are many ways to have a relationship with God. And so, or, some people have a friend who she refers with her spiritual relationship with Mother Earth, or, the universe. And so spirituality doesn't have to necessarily be a traditional deity. It can be, even if you don't believe in God, there is a universe, outside of us that we are all living in. Um, and some people like to pay respects to that, rather than a physical being or a spiritual being. So spirituality over rather than religion is more about the connection, where religion, in my opinion, and from what I've learned from my education and my life experience, religion is more about the practices. Religion, no matter the religion, you have some kind of guideline and some kind of practices to appease some type of deity. As to where spirituality is less about the practices and more about the relationship.
think that's a good description. I had a yoga instructor once who was born in Spain and was Catholic, and then became a Buddhist, and then became a Hindu. And during the yoga practice, many times she would just ask us to call on whatever our higher power is, whatever we consider to be the higher power, whether it's the universe, whether it's God, whether it's Allah. There was
Yeah.
just no distinction for her. It was just
Right.
calling your higher power. And I think most people, I believe in a higher power from my perspective. But what what in your life there probably was there some incident that maybe prompted you to think of the perspective between religion and spirituality?
It really was the education. It was the education and allowing myself to be open to other types of conversations. I also went through a period where I saw people in a specific religion, how it was kind of, we said this, but we did this. And it reminds me of, do as I say, not what I didn't do as I say, not as I do, right? And I practiced parenting like that for a little bit. And once I became more intellectual and emotionally intelligent, that phrase didn't make any sense anymore. So so I found often in the Christian religion at one point, the point where I kind of started to want to learn about the difference, because it just wasn't working for me. There was just a lot of hypocrisy in a church that I was involved in, and it hadn't been the first time I had seen hypocrisy within Christianity, but it made me really want something more. There was just such, uh, I don't know, the best way I can explain it is hypocrisy. We live by these rules unless, or we treat people this way unless, right? And I just thought this can't be it, because me as a logical person now at this point in my life, having emotional intelligence, I understand that just doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't work for me. And obviously not to say that everyone is like that. I know Christians who practice what they preach. I know Christians who are phenomenal people, and they don't judge others and they don't condemn because people are different and things like that. But it just, at that point, was just a lot of what I was seeing, and I just said, this can't be it for me.
I know you do a lot of work with parenting and helping people with their parenting skills. How does your religion slash spirituality play a role in your parenting? I'm sure you would tell somebody a little bit about your family.
Yeah. So I'm a mother of five. My kids range in age 25 to 10, and I have a 3-month-old grandson. And my parenting style through religion has changed too, because at the time that I was very strict, I wanted everyone else to be very strict too. We change our life, and in the moment we're like, okay, everyone around me needs to change as well. And I went through a period of that where, like, I wanted everybody else to be perfect, and that also kind of taught me that, hey, um, while I, as a parent, am going through certain things, I am going to want to teach them better. The better I learn, the better I want them to do, but that I also have to accept their preferences. I had certain parts of my family growing up that were kind of like, well, this is what I practice because this is what's right, and everyone else has to do that too. And I've never had really that thought process, just because I live a certain way, that's the only acceptable way to live. Even for my own children. And so my parenting has really been impacted in that manner, to where I have my own journey, but my children are allowed to have their own journey. And I just try to teach my children that in terms of myself and God, I approach my relationship with God like a parent child. In a sense of I want the best for my children. I'm going to be here to always support them. I will guide them and I will give them feedback and I will say, hey, I don't think this is the best choice for you, but I'm always going to be here to support them. And that's how I teach them about having a relationship with God. You know, um, that's how I feel about God to me. And so, I think it's important to find kind of a teaching method that teaches our children, hey, there are rules for a reason. And, but I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to condemn you, but I want you to learn these things because they're of your best interest. And, I'm here. I'm here if you make mistakes. Uh, I'm going to teach you the right path, but if you get off of it, I'm still going to be here for you. So I think that's the most major way it's impacting my parenting and kind of how I teach them how a relationship with God should be, just like your relationship with your parents.
I think a lot of people can identify with that because sometimes people do get very upset if their kids leave the religion that they're whatever religion they're in. And this, I think you have a great attitude. And I think most of us have that are parents have gone through this. Although I have to say, our audience probably won't believe you when you say that you're a grandmother and that you have a 25-year-old
Thank you.
child because you don't look much more than 25 yourself. Uh, but I know with the gray hair on my head, I've been through
Oh,
loss of
look.
some children, and I've been through children who don't follow the same religion I do, and that's, they're good people. That's to me was the most important thing, and you
Yeah,
have to think about that too.
absolutely.
And I think a lot of people's relationship with God kind of changes if they do experience a loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one or loss of a job, a loss of a way of life, whatever. Have you had any of that experience yourself where maybe your losses in life have affected your relationship with God?
Yeah, yeah. It's weird because it's like we can go through certain losses and ask why. Why are you doing this to me? Um, and as an adult, as a grown up, I don't think that that's been my approach with my relationship with God when things happen to me, but maybe younger, when I was younger, I didn't have the greatest relationship with my father because he was an addict. And I always felt like, well, why did you choose this over me? Is how I felt when I was younger. And I would pray about it from time to time, but it was more like, can you just like can you make him better or like can you make him do what I want him to do kind of thing. And it was never really like a like now if I pray about my father is can you help me to understand what happened to him to make him choose this path or kind of thing. And I have a son who is adopted who has a difficulty with abandonment by his biological mom, and I teach him to okay let's pray for understanding because people don't just choose their addictions over people for no reason and so but now as an adult I'm kind of when it comes to grief and loss I tend to try to lean more on praying for understanding, praying for support, thanking him for support and thank you for getting me through this time. One thing I try to teach my kids also is to be thankful. Personally, and this is just me personally. When I pray, I try to be thankful for things instead of asking for them. Um, and that's not something I always did, but now as an older adult, that's just kind of my preference, right? Because I think that oftentimes we can look at things and say, please do this, please take this, please, take this pain. But yeah, that's just been my personal preference when I'm dealing with loss. And I have the past couple of years. My father passed away, and then my grandmother passed away, and that it can take an emotional toll. And my preference is just to ask for peace and understanding, and and thank him for peace and understanding, instead of kind of play that blame game that I might have played when I was in my 20s.
I think that's a really healthy way of looking at things. I was just reflecting on, as you were talking about praying that God change people, or a lot of times I think we pray that God takes something away from us, whether it's a physical pain or an emotional pain.
Yeah.
And my pastor just had a homily on this recently about the fact that suffering is part of life, and not that we're asking for suffering, but it's better to pray for understanding and acceptance than it is to pray for, changing people, because that doesn't happen.
Right.
Most of the time it doesn't. But
Right. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that's a
Yeah.
very healthy way of thinking about it.
Thank you. Well, and too, sometimes, oh, this used to drive me crazy hearing someone say, well, everything happens for a reason. And sometimes people are put in our lives to teach us a lesson. And oh my gosh, but it's so true. Now that I'm a little bit older, I realize that that is such a true statement. And sometimes people go through certain situations in our paths to teach us or prepare us or guard us even, or to help us grow and help us maybe understand the situation more when we go through it ourselves.
Mhm. I think so. Um, one question I guess is, how do you correlate God with religion and with spirituality? Is it different? I mean, the spirituality part, because I think a lot of people struggle with this. What's the difference between religion and spirituality? And if you're
Right.
spiritual, well, does that mean you don't believe in God? Or
Right.
so
Right.
how do you view that?
I think, it kind of goes back to, I look at my relationship with God like a parent-child relationship. And there has to be respect on my end, but there also has to be openness and receptiveness. And I think that having a more of a spiritual relationship, like I said, is more about the relationship. And when you are more religion focused, it's more about the practices. And you can practice a religion and your spiritual relationship be the focus. Because your walk with God is your priority, and not, okay, what do I do? How many hours do I spend inside the church? How many times do I volunteer? How much do I pay each month? And all these things, all these practices and traditions that we drill into ourselves about following. And our actual relationship gets so lost when the religion becomes the priority. And so I think that's the biggest difference in the biggest difference in correlation is the biggest difference in correlation is the relationship over the religion. I mean, sorry, the relationship over the practices. The practices is what kind of gets us hung up and makes us unfocused on the religion. So spirituality is more about the relationship, in my opinion.
But I think of what I'm hearing is that you can be both religious and
Yeah,
spiritual.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
sometimes people think, well, it has to be different, you either
Yeah,
you follow a set religion or a spiritual relationship with God, but there's no reason you can't be both.
absolutely,
And at least in my opinion, religion has no purpose if it's not spiritual. So
absolutely, absolutely.
it's just following a set of human-made laws, I guess, and not really. Uh, as a Christian, you're probably familiar with Jesus saying, I didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them. And, you
Right.
know, following the letter of the law isn't as important as following the spirit of the law. So I
Yes.
think those of us who are on the Christian side can certainly identify with what we learned in Scripture. But
Yeah.
I guess, one of the things that you mentioned earlier that um, when we first met, we realized that we both had probably a lot of things in common. And I guess I would like to hear your idea of what you think today's society really needs to understand more about religion slash spirituality. So what is the one thing that you think would be helpful if everybody would understand it more?
I think that what we need to understand as a society is that the purpose of a religion is to implement practices that benefit our society and benefit our spiritual relationship, and that the it's okay for other people not to practice the same way. I think that our biggest issue on the topic, we have other issues as a society, right? But our biggest religious issue is judgment for differences. And I think that, if we all kind of accepted that, hey, every religion has the same end goal, right? We all just want to be moral people. Every single religion has its outline of morality, what you should do and what you shouldn't do and why. And I think that if we all just kind of came together and accepted one another's differences and preferences, that the world would be a little more peaceful of a place. Because even in Christianity, there's different denominations, and so there's judgment within Christianity of the way that people practice. And
Mhm.
so if we kind of did away with the stigma that you have to be like me, I think society would be a much more peaceful place. We all have the same end goal.
Yeah. You're reminding me of, I grew up as a Lutheran and I'm now a Roman Catholic, and I have been for 60 some years since I was 16. But one of the valuable lessons I learned from my Lutheran minister, and some people in the church didn't like him because they said he's too Catholic. and, and he was a Lutheran minister, but they had all sorts of rumors that I don't know how many of them are true, that he wanted to be a Roman Catholic priest, and his parents said, no, you'll become a Lutheran minister. No. But one of the valuable things he taught me when I was about 12 years old that kind of made me lean to the Roman Catholic Church is he said, and he knew that people criticized some of the things he did because he had things in the church that you typically would see in a Catholic church, but not a Lutheran church. And he said, candles and statues don't make you a religious person. He said, you you're a Lutheran or a Catholic or a Protestant or a Presbyterian or whatever because of what you know in your mind and what you feel in your heart. And I think you are an obvious um, answer to that question, because it's obvious that you studied, with your mind what's right for you, and in your heart what's right for you. And I think if we all thought that way, there would be so much less division between the religions. I think when we talked, I had told you I recently published a book called Francis of Assisi, the Universal Saint. And it was amazing. While I was gathering information for that book, I interviewed people from various religious perspectives, and atheists and agnostics, people who had no religion at all, or said, they really didn't believe in God even, but they all resonate with St. Francis, probably because of his care for the earth and all of creation, I think has really resonated with people. But I got some of the most interesting answers from the atheists than I got from anybody when I was writing
Yeah,
the book. And it was a very powerful experience for me to look at, Islam and Judaism and Catholics and Protestants and Hindus and Buddhists, and find out how much we have in common, And I think
right.
you're absolutely right. There's more that we have in common, I think, than we have that divides us. But unfortunately,
Right.
humans like to divide things. So I don't know. What do we do about that? Do you have an answer for us?
I wish I did. I wish. I there are, there's current division, and I think part, and this may be a whole nother conversation, but I've always been in support of separation of politics and religion, because I don't think that, especially here, where the point of this whole country was to be mixed and to be free and to be allowed to make your own choices. I just don't feel like here that religion should ever be political. And I think that that is part of the issue. So maybe if we could separate that back, because, then we get into social media and influence and all this kind of stuff that exacerbates these things and takes them to such a higher debatable level than they ever were, in your own neighborhood. People have conversations on the internet that they wouldn't have with their neighbor because no one's talking about that.
Right.
I've never gotten to an argument with my neighbor about religion or politics. It's just, and that's even if we don't agree. But social media, or the media in general. So I think that if we took politics or religion and politics out of one another, I think that would be a great way to start, trying to heal the division that exists around religion.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the founders of our country wrote into the Constitution separation of church and state for a very good reason, because
Right.
it does cause a lot of anguish and distress sometimes. And people, I know people within families that parents aren't talking to children or children aren't talking to parents because of these differences,
Yeah.
either in politics or religion or both in many cases. But
Right. Right.
and and then and I am a Christian, obviously, and so are you, I think, or you have a good background in it. But I hear this, well, our founding fathers were Christians, and I said, I hate to tell you, but no, they were not. Most of them were deists. They were not Christians. They didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't
Yeah.
believe in the things that Christians believe in. So I
Right.
said, that's not what our founding fathers had in mind. And I certainly agree with you, because the countries that are ruled by religion usually are the countries that are always at war. So I think there's
That's a valid point.
a good reason for, of course, I also feel like if the more countries were ruled by women, there would be less war. That's my personal feeling.
Right. Right.
Because we tend to not think about those kind of things.
Because that's not our priority for most of us. Our
Right,
priority is health, safety, success,
right.
things that matter, and
Yeah,
not these petty little things that
yeah.
are petty little differences.
Uh, well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and having you on my podcast has been really, really exciting. But is there anything that I didn't ask that maybe you want to just share some final thoughts with us?
Yeah, I appreciate being here. I love our conversations, and I'm glad to be here. And I guess I just want everybody to know that your personal walk is your personal walk, right? Don't try to live up to the expectations of society when it comes to your personal spiritual relationship. And whether that be God, whether that be the earth, the universe, whatever your spiritual relationship looks like, you don't have to live up to the expectations of society, because society is not the one who matters. The one who matters is you, and the other one who matters is the whatever you have your spiritual relationship with. Now, I'm not saying go outside and worship trees, or but you know, you don't have to fit into society's expectational box. Your personal spiritual relationship is your personal spiritual relationship is just that, and it's a private, and it's a personal, and it's a sacred thing. And whether it be in relationship or I'm sorry, whether it be in religion or out of religion, just kind of keep that in mind when it comes to your spiritual exploration.
Hey, well, thank you so much. This has been a real delight, and maybe we'll have you back again. We can pursue this thought a little bit more, but thanks so
Yeah.
much for being a guest.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to being here again.